Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of The Lamb Show, brought to you by Lamb Talk. And today our conversation is going to be with Kent Pfennig, a sheep producer from Driscoll, North Dakota. And in full disclosure, he is also my husband, and now living in New Zealand for a few years, but he'll be departing soon back to North Dakota for another farming season. And so welcome, Kent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Kent, tell us what was your first experience with sheep?
Well, memory of my first experience with sheep was, Dad bringing them into the house when I was young. Bring them in as bottle lambs or as a bit of a hospital for the little lambs being born in the wintertime. And I think just like any other farm kid that has livestock, that's the first experience, is the babies coming to the house for a bit of a incubation or warm up, and then of course some don't go. A lot of them go back out to the mothers after they get warmed up and dried off, but a lot of them don't get taken back, and you end up raising them as bottle lambs. And I used to have quite a bit to do with that, and then get them back on their feet, and until we had too many to handle in the house or around in the little garage we had for them, whatever, and then we would try to sell them off. I remember Dad selling bottle lambs back in those days, roughly late 60s or in the 1970 area, for $2 a lamb. and of course, I'm not sure, but I suppose that when they were full grown, they were probably only bringing about $25, so $2 for a bottle lamb probably seemed about right. I don't know. That's where we started. That's my first experience. And of course, I helped Dad on the farm with as much as I could as a little kid. I thought it was pretty important to the farming operation from my point of view, but and I enjoyed it a lot, but with all aspects of it. But we had a lot to, always was involved and wanted to involve myself with the raising of the livestock, and the sheep were kind of something that I could handle, and so I would help with the shearing and, the birthing and the raising of the lambs. And
So now when you were shearing, you'd have mallards come out, Leon and Lee?
Well, before that, there was a guy named Harley Allball from Sterling, which was about 8 miles away from Driscoll, but he was the go-to guy in there, at that time, and I thought he was a pretty old guy then, but he probably was not much older than I am now. But
and that's so old.
Yeah, but Harley was the shearer, and then I remember having him come along. He had a little Ford pickup, all decked out with a little camper, and he had his shearing set up in the back of this little camper set up with he had a place to sleep in there, and a place to sharpen his shearing gear, and it just seemed, I was pretty impressed as a young kid that how organized he was. And when he came, he was, it was all set up. And but we had him for probably 10 years of shearing that Harley did it all. And then as he was getting older, he started to train Lee and Leon Mallard. They were from south of Minokan. And they started training them to be sheep shearers. And then, of course, Harley retired, and Mallards were then the family friends and the shearers for us from then on. Our numbers of sheep we used to have went, wasn't always the same. Dad was kind of would you say, entrepreneurial in a way. He would fluctuate the size of his flock with the markets a bit. And but mallards always were able to handle the job. It might have taken 2 or 3 days sometimes. So, yeah. And and then of course my job when it was shearing time was tying the fleece, and then putting the fleece in the wool sack, and then getting in the full sack and trying to pack it down. So the more you could pack in the wool sack, the easier the sack was to handle, and of course the less sacks it would take, it was more efficient, and so on. But that was my job as a young guy, and then as I got big enough to actually handle the sheep and catch them and flip them over and put them in front of the shear so the shearer could take off with them, those were all things that were my duties at shearing time. And yeah, it was always fun.
Yeah.
And just different experiences as I'm thinking of it. But I remember back in the old early days, I remember insecticides weren't very common or as easy to come by. And I remember always being, at the end of the day, finding what we called sheep ticks. That was just one memory of what would come about from shearing. And but it was always just a fun time. But we used to do it different times of the year. In the winter, we would shear sometimes we would just do what we did called tagging, where you would just clean up the wool in the back end of the sheep, so that, and around their bags, or call it their udder, so that when the lamb was born, that it could find the teat on its own. A lot that easier than if it's a lot of wool hanging there. And I don't know, for some reason, I guess I've experienced it even later on now as an adult, but we would have January and cold weather lambing, and you didn't want to shear the ewe all the way because the elements were just too cold, so you would try to just keep all the wool on the back of the sheep, but just clean up the back end so that when the lamb would be able to get along better. But why we didn't do more summer lambing is always a mystery, but I think I'm understanding why, because we still had these accidents of the rams getting out too soon, and so you end up with January and cold weather lambing more than you should. So, but otherwise, then we would shear in the winter for lambing purposes, and then we would, like say, if it was just the tagging part, we called tagging. That was what that shearing and cleaning them up around the udder was. And
I think in New Zealand that's called crutching.
Crutching, yeah. And then, of course, if you didn't take the back wool off, then you would end up doing that in the warm part of the year after the cold rains and everything are over, and it would be more like a June and July job. And then you've gone from one extreme to the other, one extreme being the coldest time of the year, and then the other shearing period is the hottest time of the year. And, it was always interesting getting in the wool sack, and getting the wool was about 7 feet long, and as a kid, you're about 4 feet tall, and so you'd end up getting that fleece of wool dumped over the top of you when you're in the sack trying to pack it down. And
hot, smelly, and oily.
Yeah. You learn the effects of lanolin quickly. Yeah. And then, so those are all good memories of dealing with wool, and the camaraderie of having the shearers come around, and it's kind of an annual event you look forward to. It was good.
Now, so those are your early memories of sheep. What about eating it? Did Anne ever put it on the dinner table for you?
Not real often. I think beef was still the preferred meat, and lamb was always even though we raised lamb, we considered a bit of a specialty food. it was, it was probably more expensive, even though we were raising it. So you had to kind of wait for the right opportunity to have an animal that might not have been marketable or was too old to be considered a lamb. A lamb is a year, 12 months old, basically. And sometimes you'd end up with an animal that was a wether, a male, so it didn't have any reproductive value, but yet it was, over a year old, which made it a cheaper animal. And quite frankly, I think most people that have eaten lamb like to eat one that is more than a year old, older than what's considered a lamb. And so when we'd end up with one of those, we'd have it in the freezer, and leg of lamb was still the what we would look forward to for a special meal. So we did have it some, but we still ate it quite sparingly, I guess, and on special occasions. I always liked the flavor of it. As a once-in-a-while meal, we all liked it, yeah.
Did your mum have or did you have a favourite way that your mum prepared the leg?
Well, just as I'd say it was a roast, and I didn't really know exactly how she made it. It was a slow cook kind of a roast, but dry roasted as far as I remember. Mm-hmm. And
probably with some garlic and rosemary.
Oh, yeah, I'm definitely. Of course, I always had to have onion and garlic. It was prerequisite for any roasting.
For any self-respecting German family.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's how I remember having most lamb. And then the lamb chops, of course. That was always it almost seemed like there was too much bone there to actually enjoy eating the lamb chops very much. But they were a nice change and easy to eat. Nice change, but
yeah, ratio of meat to bone is not terribly good, is it?
No, but
the meat's sure good, but there's just never enough of it.
Well, that's right, and then I think especially for people that are used to eating, probably 16-ounce portions of meat, it made eating lamb chops kind of a chore almost.
Right.
But as I get older now, you start to value that. Don't have that large portion as a everyday occurrence anymore. So I think eating lamb chops is more rewarding to me now. Older as my diet changes, or eating pattern is different now than it used to be.
As you're not a growing teenage boy.
Yeah, exactly. yeah. And I'm not taking pride in how much I can put away anymore. So yeah, but. So, yeah, the diet of the lamb was as I remember, was just leg of lamb and lamb chops. And I'm trying to think now what we did with the other cuts, but I think we sometimes just didn't get around to some of those other cuts very much if it wasn't a chop. Well, and we had lamb burger, so I guess that's still pretty much most of it. How lamb gets used is either ground up or in your two major cuts is either chops or roast. Mm-hmm. Yeah, my dad I don't think liked lamb as much as I did, or my mom, and so we didn't eat. We ate what Dad liked, and he would take a beefsteak over lamb any day.
Right, of course. So now, what was the best part of the sheep production? What was your favourite part of having the sheep?
That's kind of a hard question to really be decisive about. But lambing time, even though it was a lot of work, was trying to save lambs and so on, I still thought that was the time of the year I still would look forward to, and the multiple births and
the new life.
Yeah, it can be quite agonizing, and trying to be a good herdsman and saving as many lambs as you can, but it's still what you look forward to as a livestock producers that you look forward to that new life. And I would have to say that was my favorite time.
But sheep can be very challenging as well, can't they? So what's the most challenging part of sheep production?
Well, even though like I just said, look forward to the birthing, but honestly, they are challenging from the weather affecting the baby lambs. Then it's the mothering, whether they have milk or not, and so it's you always seem like keep the ewes' productive years are pretty limited to maybe 5 or 6 lambings, and of course there's not much market in an older ewe, especially years ago it was almost no value, so you don't cull out your ewes, like a cow has quite a bit of value when she's doesn't raise a calf anymore, but a sheep, she's just not worth much, so you end up keeping her longer than you should, and you end up going, when do you cull her? Well, when it's really obvious she's not a good mother anymore, and so you end up having lambs born but no milk from the mother, and so that's when this bottle lamb thing becomes an issue, and you end up with lambs not doing well, and you can go on and on and on, but there are rewarding moments at the same time. But from a management, that was how I remember it with my dad, and I know I experience it myself, is that you always try to get one more year out of that mother, and you end up with problems at doing it. But I think the one aspect of raising lamb or sheep that I remember that I think came down to be my favorite was buying lambs that were weaned, and feeding them on the grass, and at the end of the year that we'd let them run on the stubble fields and put extra weight on them in the fall. And I think that was one practice my dad had developed, where he would do that. He would buy the lambs, but when other people were selling as a weaning, after they'd just taken them off their mothers, and we would raise them for a couple more months. And I enjoyed that part of raising sheep.
And then in the latter years of farming, before we moved, we had Katahdin sheep, which were the hair sheep. What were the pros and cons of changing the entire type of sheep that we had? Years ago when I was working with my dad and growing up, and of course we had woolly sheep like everybody did, and then I went nearly 15 years without raising sheep anymore, or longer, and it was just because my situation changed, and there really wasn't a place for sheep in my operation anymore. But then, in getting back into it, it was when after Kate and I were together, or you and I, and we looked at it from a different angle, and that's when I didn't even know there was such a thing as a hair sheep. Back in discovering that there is such a thing as hair sheep, and so you have to say, why a hair sheep? Well, they're so much different to manage, as far as there's a lot of work that goes in with into the wool. And there's the shearing, and there's the extra trouble that lambing because of the heavy body, the wool on the body, and then there's paying a shearer to take the wool off, and right now, there's a good value to that wool again, and hope it stays. But years ago, when we got back into sheep and discovered the hair sheep, it would look like a no-brainer, because it was costing more to take the wool off than it was worth. But so anyway, the hair sheep, it made sense from a less management, and I wasn't really going into it as a full-out production at that point. And we wanted something that was easy to manage.
But in the consequence of once owning the hair sheep, we've found out that the eating quality of that animal is, in my opinion, quite superior to the woolly sheep. And I don't think it's been documented by anybody in print, but I believe there's something to do with the wool production, whether the hormone or whatever that gives the wool a smell is also in some of the sheep, and without that being in that characteristics of the hair sheep, it just seems like it has a nicer, more neutral flavor. So that's one of the reasons I've been impressed with the hair sheep is from, they only have one quality, which is the meat, and it is exceptional. And if I was to raise something just for meat quality, it would be the hair sheep, no doubt about it. In that being said, there's different breeds, whether it be Katahdin or Dorper, and there's several other ones.
St.
Croix. And there's several to choose from, but I think the Dorper is the breed that I like the best as far as the putting weight on. The Katahdin are great for mothers and so on, but I think the Dorper is the heavier breed, and so if you're selling pounds, I like the Dorper the best. But they do come with some baggage as well with their feet, and it seems like their hooves don't stop growing, or they grow too fast, and so you have some management problems with keeping their feet in shape.
Mm-hmm. But perhaps a hybrid of the two is a good compromise.
Yeah, I think so. I think that you can come up with a nice good mix with crossbreeding the two.
Well, have you got any funny stories? Usually you've got a funny story involving livestock. They're always up to antics. And you got any funny stories with the sheep?
Well, the only thing that comes to my mind is one of the boys, when I was about 2 years old, standing up to the sheep buck lately. That didn't happen to me, but the sheep bucks are always looking for something to hit with their heads, and I remember one of the boys standing up to the sheep buck saying, no buck, when you could tell it was thinking about ramming them, and it might have been Sean, I think it was, but he was far shorter than the buck was standing there, and he was telling him off, and seemed to get the job done. That was my latest memory. And having sheep around as bottle lambs just leaves you open to a lot of things, and some good and some bad. You put a lot of work into having bottle lambs around, and then silly things like getting them, after they've withstood all the digestive problems of overeating in dogs or something like that, then you end up running them over.
They have no fear, and they think they're part of the family.
Yeah, they get comfortable laying in the shade
of the pickup.
Some things happen,
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. But they are handy for leading the rest of the flock through the gates and things, because they'll follow you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's that pet issue with livestock is always a challenge. They're fun to keep around, but then they have no fear anymore of walking through something or getting into your backyard or anything like that. Well, we're talking here from New Zealand, and of course, it's the sheep production is quite different over here. I mean, it's the same in a lot of ways, but from the environment that I grew up in, where northern hemisphere, and you're making hay half the year, and I guess I've been, it seems like we make hay in the summer. We make hay and haul hay, and winter you feed hay. And then again in the summer you haul out the hay that was fed last winter, and it's all around hay. And here in New Zealand, the grass grows year round to some extent, and putting up feed for the sheep is almost non-existent, and so it really changes how things are done, and the carrying capacity of the land is amazing. At home, we'll probably have we'll be able to graze one sheep, one ewe, and lamb on an acre of land, and then you'll probably need another acre of land or nearly an acre of land for feed for that ewe over winter. And so you have quite a bit of land devoted per animal, and here in New Zealand, the land's really expensive and so on, but you can keep about five ewes on an acre of land here, where at home we had to have devoted nearly about 2 acres to a ewe. So it's quite different. So here you can have five ewes on an acre, and at home you needed 2 acres for a ewe. So quite a difference. Anyway, otherwise they don't have hair sheep here. Haven't seen any of those to mount anything here. I think that there might be a good little opportunity for lifestyleists to have hair sheep, because they would like to have sheep, but getting someone, even in New Zealand, getting someone around to shear a couple of animals is quite bothersome. And then they have a problem here with what's called fly strike, where the wool is wet a lot, that the flies will lay eggs right into the wet wool. Mm-hmm. And so then, that's quite a management problem they have in the wet times here. Right,
because then the eggs hatch and the maggots start eating on the meat.
Exactly.
The live animal. Yeah. And it's a really serious, between fly strike and facial eczema.
Yeah.
That they don't battle predators at all in New Zealand. No predators, but fly strike and facial eczema.
Well, that is the one nice thing about New Zealand, is that they don't have to worry about coyotes.
Coyotes, wolves.
Yeah, cougars, anything like that. So, and New Zealand's conditions grow grass better than any place in the world, I think. And so it's really set up well for grazing animals. Dairy is taking over most of the land that's fairly flat in New Zealand. So the dairy or the sheep industry has really been diminishing. So
it's been pushed into harder and harder country.
Yeah, and but I guess that's being reflected in the price of sheep now. Lately, it's nearly doubled in value, and there appears to be a shortage in the world, and I think New Zealand is just an example of why that's happening. There's more what used to be more profitable enterprises to put that land use to.
Right. Dairy conversion's been a big money mover in New Zealand for the last 15 years.
Yeah. Well, just like we've experienced in the States, there's years where you have these animals, and you don't. At the end of the year, you wonder why you go through so much effort for such little profit, if any, and or death loss or whatever, and. Dairy has a lot more stable market, and just about all cultures consume milk, it seems. Not everybody likes to eat lamb. So.
Right. Although it is eaten per capita. It's the most widely eaten protein, lamb and goat.
In the world?
In the world.
Oh.
Yeah. Between Africa and Asia and the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. One thing about consuming lamb is that we've noticed been coming to New Zealand and visiting for over 18 years' time, and when we first started back in 95, I guess it's been about 17 years, but lamb meat in the supermarket was quite cheap. It was, and it was hardly any value at all to it in the store. Everybody wanted to eat pork and beef, and oddly enough, I remember being amazed at how pork and chicken had some of the most expensive meats in New Zealand, and lamb especially was cheap here, where it was just totally opposite from the prices in the States, where we had pork and chicken that were
cheap,
were priced under $1 a pound, and lamb was really expensive. So it was really upside down for what I was used to. However, now at this point in the game, it seems like all the meats are about the same price, and people are complaining like crazy about the price of lamb, but it's just that it's come up to the level of the other meats, and it's all around $10. No, it's more like about $15 a kilo for average meat, and you have some of your better beef cuts up in leg of lamb and lamb chops up around close to $30 a kilo.
Yeah, well, I remember as a child we would buy half a lamb for $25. That'd be half a side, and then I was just in the butcher's today, and I got some shoulder lamb chops on sale, which is the only reason why I was buying it, and that was $11 a kilo today. And they had chicken thighs for $4.99 a kilo.
For most people, as the U.S. audience, so a kilo is 2.2 pounds. So even $11 a kilo is like $5 a pound. And if you convert the U.S. money into New Zealand money into U.S. money, New Zealand's at 80% of U.S., so $5 a pound meat is really $4 US a pound. So it seems like a lot of money here, and maybe it's just because we're buying so much because we're not raising it, but it's probably still cheaper than we're used to in the States.
Yeah, well, it was on sale too, and they had legs, which I probably should have got one to put in the freezer for when we do need one for Easter or something, because they were like nearly $14 a kilo, which is about the cheapest I've ever seen them since we've been back in December. The chops are usually around $17, $18 a kilo.
Right.
And hamburger, beef hamburger, I can get it on sale at $10 a kilo. But if you want good quality, it's up around $15 a kilo.
Yeah. It seems like what we've been experiencing is that all the meat starts out at about $15 a kilo, and then as it stays on the shelf, it gets a little cheaper as its expiry time comes close. So
as its use-by date gets closer?
Yeah.
That must be when I buy it.
Yeah.
And put it in my freezer.
Right. It don't seem like they're going to have another use for it, so they have to keep ratcheting the price down until you end up buying it. And, the longer it's been on the shelf, the cheaper it gets. But I think it's still all really good. It's just that it's been laying out there too long, or, getting close to being too long. Anyway, the lamb meat's good. And can't say we've been buying much of it over in New Zealand, though. No,
I've been horrified at the price, and like I said, today I bought some just because it got down to $11 a kilo, and I thought, I don't think it's going to get any cheaper. So I bought some shoulder chops today for in the freezer, and we'll look forward to having them. Well, thank you very much, Kent, and it's been interesting. And hopefully we'll get to talk to you again, maybe about how this North Dakota boy is coping with a move to New Zealand. Yeah. Maybe when you get back from the summer in the States and get settled back into the rhythm with family and everything back in New Zealand in August. Well, maybe we'll have another conversation then.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you very much. And listeners, if you want to hear more episodes, go to www.lambshow.com. Proudly brought to you by Lamb Talk and Wild Inspire. Thanks very much. We'll see you around the block.
This show is produced by Wild Inspire Media.